because I'm in this Canadian quarantine where I can't leave the house for 2 weeks. So I posted on Instagram, like, hey, if there's, people who want to ask me questions, I have time so I can Zoom. And I've been Zooming with a couple of new emerging filmmakers every night. And this is weird to say. I can tell within 5 minutes, and I'm sure it's like not talking a single thing about film. It's how someone talks. It's their ability to tell a story, how they speak about themselves, how they speak about the world. Like, you just know if someone is a filmmaker. And there was 1 or 2 people who, just chatting with them, I'm not even sure if they've made a film, but now I'm invested in that person. And I'm like, please reach out to me. How can I help you? If I believe in you or I see something in you, I will do anything to help you. That being said, I don't DM me and say, can you read my script? Like, that's not the way to get support. But if you do it in the right way and I believe in you, I really will do anything.
Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon is a podcast on directing for anybody that's quite simply ever watched anything. Pete converses with a wide range of fellow directors, writers, actors, showrunners, producers, executives, and more on a journey to determine just what makes a good director and why we'll always need stories. The Director is Pete Chatmon's digital studio, built on the pillars of craftsmanship that ensure a unique vision. I'm talking about story, innovation, perspective. Learn more about The Director, and better yet, get your official Director's Chair wear by visiting www.drctr.video. That's drctr.video.
All right, folks, what's up? This is Pete Chatmon welcoming you to episode 15 of Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon. And if I'm incorrect, I apologize because right now I am on set, back shooting, currently working on season 2 of Mythic Quest, which is a great show. If you haven't checked out season 1, check it out on Apple TV. McGLYNN is an awesome director, a writer, a producer. She is from Canada. You'll get to enjoy her lovely t-shirt in the video when you hop into the other side of this intro. And she came up in the world of short films, which I'm always an admirable fan of because of the passion that it communicates for storytelling, the dedication to making it happen by any means. And there's a great deal of filmmaking and storytelling learning to be had in the short film process. So she's from that. She came up, she made a feature called Mary Goes Round, starring Aya Cash. And this is probably the first episode where our guest is a direct reflection of the lightning round question, who should be our next guest? So McGLYNN is here. She has plenty to share on her journey from Canada to Hollywood, from short film to producing director on Bless This Mess. And she's just a really great pleasure to talk to, and I hope you enjoy. And I will check you out on the other side.
Roll sound. Speed.
The interview. Take 1.
Action. So tell me, what do you consider yourself, a writer first or a director?
I consider myself a writer first, and I think it's sort of by fluke that I ended up being a director for hire, which I always feel like a bit of an asshole for saying because so many people are trying to get into the episodic game. And when they ask how I got into it, and I was like, I actually didn't know I was getting into it. And the reason being was I started my career in Canada, and I had an agent up here who was representing me as a writer and director. And I was earlier in my career sort of saying, where are all these writing jobs? Like, how do I get in a room? And he said to me, oh, I've been pitching you as a director. I was like, oh, that sort of explains why I'm not getting into a writer's room right now. So, I think his strategy at the time a few years ago was when people were really starting to be more open to the concept of female directors, which is sort of a phrase that I loathe. However,
well, what phrase do you prefer?
You know what? Maybe I take that back. I am okay with being categorized as such, but I don't enjoy questions that preface questions about my work with, as a female director, how did you blah, blah, blah. You know,
Right.
In that context, it has no relevance.
Right.
But I, back to your question about being a writer, I've always written, and, like a lot of people, I started doing shorts and whatnot just to get my work made because no one really cared. And at one point, it just sort of switched, and that was when I started directing TV after I'd made my first feature. But interestingly enough, I've done more episodic work in the past 2 years, and now I'm sort of trying to swing back to the writer-director, writer identity.
Right. Isn't it interesting how, like, you do all these things, right? You have such a long journey, and you have a couple articles that I want to talk about later that I think are great that you wrote. But then you finally get that shot, and now you're only considered able to do the thing for which you got the shot. So when you think about like the first films, like what was the thing that pushed you to make that first short?
The thing that pushed me to make my first short, which is called I'm Not a Weird Person, is because my roommate and I lived in Toronto over a convenience store where we'd like smoke cigarettes on the fire escape and like watch the raccoons. I was talking about wanting to direct, and she was a comedian and writer, and she wrote a script about an agoraphobe contained location, and she said, why don't you direct it? And I said, I can't do that. And she said, well, if you want to be a director, you're going to have to fucking direct at some point. And I said, okay, when are we doing this? Pulled out her calendar, put a date, I think it was like a month out. And I was like, how are we shooting this? We have no money. Who's producing this? And she said, we are. And I was like, are you fucking crazy? So then a week into it, I was like, something came up that weekend, I can't. She's like, no, cancel whatever you're doing. You're directing this thing. So we made a very lo-fi Indiegogo video and raised a couple grand, and off we went. And I really credit my friend Marnie for the reason why I'm a director today, because I needed the kick off the ledge. She's Dutch. She loves to just get things done. She's very pragmatic. And here we are.
That's awesome. Yeah, sometimes you have to dive into the pool to see whether or not you sink or swim.
Right. And it was pretty chaotic. The first short is just like, she wrote it, she was starring in it, involved a cat. We didn't know she was allergic to cats. She's covered in hives. We don't know what we're doing. The whole thing. Like, she stayed up till 4 a.m. making craft for everybody. Like, it was banana town.
But that, if you haven't cut your teeth on a short film where you've done every single job, like literally, like you're telling, right? Like you're working on craft, I got to go pick up the van in the States. And I don't know if it's different in Canada, but the thing that was the biggest hurdle as a young filmmaker was who's 25 and who can rent the van.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And you find out who your friends are when you're like, will you go get this van for me and give me the key?
Oh, for sure. I remember Marnie slept in a parking garage because the equipment was in the van.
See?
Like the talent is sleeping in the van. Like the whole thing is crazy. So, but that once I did that, it's really activates the addiction part of my brain. I was just like, oh God, I can't stop doing this now.
So can you pinpoint the first story that you remember hearing, seeing, or even like a thing you watched happen live with friends and family that kind of stands out to you as like, look at the power of storytelling?
I mean, so much. Like, my family is all from Ireland. Irish culture is very much into oral storytelling. My grandfather in Ireland, I remember him saying to me when I was a kid, he said, knock on any front door and you'll find a bestseller. And he said, some people have a novella and some people have Moby Dick, but it's up to you to figure out what it is. And I didn't know what he was talking about at the time, but that has really guided my curiosity about people. And then I was born in Montreal, but our family moved to New Jersey. So, we were always hopping on the train, Midtown Direct to New York. And every Sunday, my mom would be like, just see whatever cheap tickets, NYC ticks she could get. And, we saw Samuel Beckett, we saw Ragtime, like whatever was playing that was cheap tickets, we would go to. So I was constantly exposed to stuff, whether or not I liked it or not, i.e. Samuel Beckett when you're 8. So I can sort of attribute my culture and specifically my mother, who, I think had a poet spirit and gave me the value of storytelling.
That seems like a very useful, and maybe you never know you're getting these gems when they're being given to you, but that seems like a very useful thing for directing as well, because there's a certain humanity that you have to hope for in these people that you're working with sometimes that might present you with challenging attitudes or temperaments. And it's like, everybody's moving through the world with their own suitcase and just kind of trying to discover what the novella or the Moby Dick novel or whatever it is that is really the reason behind whatever person you're meeting each day.
That's so great. What was I going to say? Oh yeah. The other thing that I really valued, you're a New Yorker as well, right?
Well, I want to come back because I grew up in New Jersey and I didn't know that you lived there for a time. So we'll come back to that. Okay.
Just, the proximity to all the museums too. Like when we first moved to New Jersey, I was like 5 and none of the furniture had arrived at the house. And my mom was just like, what am I supposed to do with these kids? We had 5 daughters. She brought us to a museum and she said, you cried the whole way there. You didn't want to go to the museum. And then when you got there, she was like, I saw a shift in you. And she was like, she's not with us anymore, but she said she knew at that point I was going to be creative. And she said the security guard was like, all right, get out, museum's closing. And she said, you just cried the whole way home. So there was this thing that happened to you in that space. I also minored in art history in college. So, I think as filmmakers, cinema language is so important, but it's also about art history. It's about music. It's just so interdisciplinary.
Yeah. There's a George Lucas quote I used to remember, but
it's totally great, man.
But I had it on. I used to teach at NYU, and the quote was like, it basically dealt with the fact that like filmmaking is what you're saying. It's literature, it's psychology, it's it's architecture, it's almost every discipline rolled into one. And when you have a fluency and an ability to kind of know which one of them is most important in every moment that you're directing, you'll find that you can really craft and have more control over what you're doing. And so where in New Jersey did you live?
I grew up in Chatham, New Jersey, which is North Jersey.
Oh my God, this is crazy. So I grew up in South Orange.
That's wild. Isn't
really
that Lauryn Hill's town?
I went to high school with her.
That is wild. I used to walk around the Short Hills Mall, and once we saw Lauryn Hill going into some like fancy store, I think we like chased that poor woman and her kids around as teenagers.
She was probably going into the Polo store. And she worked at that mall at the Foot Locker for a period of time. And I used to work at the Banana Republic, which was right next to Country Road, Australia. So I may have seen you at the mall. I might have sold a pair of socks to you or someone in your family.
You may have, because I spent a lot of time there. A teenage girl in New Jersey, there's not much to do.
The mall stroll. That's a Saturday afternoon event. What type of museum did you go to? Was it a natural history? Was it art?
Dinosaurs are cool, but I really like the MoMA is my place. I think it's this 5th or 6th floor. The top floor has everything like post 1946 onwards, and that floor is my jam. Like if I won the lottery, I would fully like night at the museum, but there, and like get segways for me and all my friends to like ride around and have sleep over there.
That would be pretty awesome. I had a MoMA subscription at a point where I was just like trying to get a discount on the cool shit that they sold.
Yeah.
So for the people who are listening, Molly has on a Canadian Stereotype t-shirt. And I actually wanted to ask, like, what's the difference if you could pinpoint it? And I'm not trying to make any broad sweeping generalizations, but like, what's the difference between being Canadian and being American? And how do you think that affects working in this particular industry?
Oh God. There is a general sense of social responsibility and collective ideology that I think Canadians really pride themselves on. So in terms of how it relates to this business, I mean, I'm nothing without my community of people. I've made no work without everyone who's showed up. So, the Canadian in me feels comfortable being part of something bigger than myself. And I think at the same time, there is this sort of beautiful, fraught, complicated ideology of American individualism. And I grew up in the US, so half my time is spent there. So I've seen both sides. That ideology has made for amazing artists, but then there's a shadow side to that as well, too.
Right. Yeah, it's the gift and the curse, right? And it's like all these political debates where it's like, capitalism or whatever. And then we don't want to, or some don't want to acknowledge that there are many quote unquote communist or socialist things that make the country actually work, and it's like, how do you find a balance between individualism, but also collective progress?
Yeah.
And do you think that has attributed to like any like temperament for you? Because I feel like I was on a Zoom yesterday, and I feel like the biggest thing I often get into when talking about this job we do as directors is that it's so much about emotional intelligence, and it's so much about like really how you deal with incoming bullshit, right?
Write that one down.
So like, does it contribute to like any enhanced skill in dealing with that?
I wouldn't say that my sort of national identity has anything to do with that. I would say that it has everything to do with my personal experiences and personal trauma and just a whole bunch of shit, family crap. But I sort of have a theory that the people who are drawn to work in this industry have had difficult childhoods, and that theory might be wrong, but like, there's a resilience that this industry requires. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes people who have gone through difficult things inherently are more resilient. So I don't know if there's some sort of overlap there, or this is just complete bullshit.
I feel like we're at doctorate level conversation. This is all very accurate.
Wildly unqualified. It's I don't know. It's funny. Like the Canadian in me, I like to be polite. I don't try to take up, like, I'm not into the director as persona type energy. It's not really my vibe. But at the same time, it's like, I always say, like, the Jersey can come out. It's like, there's also that Irish blood, grew up in Jersey. So it's like, I'm Canadian to some degree, but then damn, watch out.
Right. Yeah. Just so you know, please don't make me remind you.
Don't let me remind you. That Irish temper runs hot.
Exactly. And it's like fuel. It's like, it's there. It's there when you need it. Well, let's talk about the journey. Like you kind of were propelled into these short films. And what I love about what you've done is you were like, let me explore my voice. Let me kind of, it seems like there was a sense of there's a quality and quantity here, and let me just keep making different shorts and mastering my craft. Can you talk about how you viewed the period in which you did? How many shorts did you do? It looks like you had Office Daydreams, I'm Not a Weird Person, Shoes, Given Your History, and Three-Way, Not Calling.
Yeah,
Were there more than that?
Yeah, that seems about right. And like a couple of other, branded content and whatever. That period was very fraught. It was a growth period. It was a learning period. It was in my 20s where I was struggling through some personal stuff as well. But when I look back on it now, it's like that period was awesome. I was trying things on. I didn't even know I was a comedy director. I had been rejected from, there was this weird time where I was writing the script for what would then be my feature, Mary Goes Round, in a shed in Los Angeles. And I had interviewed at the AFI for their Women's Directors Lab. Mm-hmm. And then I drove back to Canada and hadn't heard anything from AFI. And then I got back and there was a rejection letter from them. Then I got a rejection letter about Canadian funding for Three-Way Not Calling. It was bleak. It was like driving from LA into the Canadian April winter, sitting outside, drinking whiskey on the stoop, and just being like, well, fuck. I made Three-Way Not Calling a comedy because I wanted to see if I could write comedy, to see if I was funny. And oddly, leading up to that, most of the stuff had been more drama. And then that short sort of got me on the map a little bit, and it got me an interview for Working Moms, which is a half-hour comedy on Netflix, and sort of went from there. But it's funny that, to your point earlier about sort of being pigeonholed, I just did an experimental short to test a skill set, and that ended up now a few years later, it's like, oh, I'm sort of in half-hour comedy right now.
Right. Yeah, it's so interesting. I'm a person who did 4 directing programs. And in the first one, they were like, do you view yourself more as comedy or drama? And I was rambling for 3 minutes to silence on the other end of the phone, at which point I was like, what do you think? Right? because I had there's the motivations I had, the agendas I had for the stories I told. And I saw that more than the way that I approached them, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I had this serious topic that had humor to it, but to me, it was dramatic. And but people didn't receive it that way because of the packaging. And I was like, man, it's really, that's probably a big challenge for us. It's can you identify what you're doing yourself before they pigeonhole you into somewhere that you didn't want to be placed? Yeah. And so what would you say, if you could, what would be if you went through each of your shorts, what skill did you learn from each one? If you could on the spot identify, when I did shoes, I really got, I enhanced my ability with editing, or I don't know,
Yeah. The first one, I'm not a weird person. I would just say I learned how the hell you even make how a set runs. Shoes was an experiment, high concept that I don't think worked. But I tried something that was sort of outside of the space. That should have been a poem or a short story. But anyways, Given Your History was sort of a real short. There was money behind it. It was 14 minutes. What I learned from that is maybe don't be so earnest with drama. But also I was working with 2 great actors, and I feel like they leveled me up a little bit. Got more into camera language with that one. And then I'm not Three-Way Not Calling was a threesome sex comedy. So a lot of that was working with actors in, sex scenes and comfort levels and the delicacy required around that.
Right. And I do want to back up. You said with shoes, it was it maybe should have been more of a poem, but was there anything was there anything else that you took away from it that you applied later?
It was my attempt to do something that existed on visual storytelling, less so a narrative script. It was more poetic, I would say. So absolutely, that's a valuable exercise.
Right. So it was kind of like a tone poem.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, which is a thing in and of itself. There's a bit of an art to that too, though, right? Because like if you're able to, sometimes like you get a montage opportunity in some show where you can really like push the visual style because it's unique to your episode, and you can maybe go back to the beauty of your shoes skill.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you get to How to Buy a Baby? Because was that something that was paid for? Was that a Canadian production or was that like an independent production?
Canada has like all sorts of funding opportunities, which is a real advantage to emerging filmmakers. They have something called the Independent Production Fund, which I think finances web series are up to $250,000, which is healthy for web series. Great comedic writer Wendy Littner wrote it. It's 10 episodes of a couple struggling to have a child via IVF and all of that. So I directed all of those episodes. And doing a web series, like I think I did it after the feature. A web series more or less felt like a feature to me. It's continuous production, and it's even though they're contained episodes, it takes about the same amount of time and energy. But yeah, that was great. Like the series was nominated for an international Emmy, which was cool. Because we were just a little group of Canadians doing a web series.
Right. And so that, I didn't know that. So that you shot that after Mary Goes Round.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I needed a job.
Hey, look, that is for all the people listening. That is, I had a guest on, my buddy Dorian Missick, who was like, when you see me in, a show like this, just know I'm doing it to pay for the arty shit I'm about to do next summer.
Oh, totally. Luckily, How to Buy a Baby was like one of my favorite things still ever. But I fully anticipate things in my career that it's for the work, right. And that's okay. There is no shame in that.
Right. At the end of the day, too, I mean, we are craftspeople, right? Like I hear about some of these architects that friends deal with where they're like, they want a particular room or door and the architect will like refuse to do it. And I'm like, there are directors who operate like that. And it's not a good place to be for longevity. So I want to read this quote from your Rejection is How You Become a Filmmaker, Pete. Now, was that for TIFF? Was that a blog post for TIFF, or was it an article?
I sort of like angrily wrote it and just self-published it on Medium, and then I think someone at TIFF was like, "Can we publish this on our website?"
So, well, yeah, it clearly speaks to the process. So it said, "Yes, I love what I do, and yet there are so many moments where the process of being a filmmaker is heartbreaking, frustrating, and brings out weird emotions, especially as you get rejected from stuff, which is pretty much all the time." And I feel like in everyone's career or journey, there's like the peaks and the valleys, and that probably kind of falls into the valley portion. Like, what is it that kept you going, and how did you, and this is really a transitional question into like talking about Mary Goes Round, like, how did you navigate that period of time and all the rejection to make a film that went on to be so award-winning and so well done? I saw it in Santa Monica at the theater, and it seems that propelled you into so many different opportunities.
I mean, what kept me going? I think people like us, I feel like, to persevere through those valleys, like there's self-belief, and then there's like maybe a little bit of delusion. Like you're just sort of like deluded into thinking it'll work out. And I don't think in that context, it's a negative thing. So, I was slightly deluded. The other thing I will say that people don't talk about a lot, but I think it's important for people to hear in terms of like access and support and all this. So I went through a program called the Canadian Film Center, which is sort of like, would sort of be like an NYU screenwriting type program. I am very close. One of my closest friends from college in Canada her family sort of generously supported me during that transitional time. They saw how hard I was working and said, look, you need our support. And my parents are not in the picture. So I was given the opportunity basically to have my rent paid for a year. So wow. In terms of how I got through that valley, like it's because I had financial support from people who saw what I was trying to do. And I think that is an enormous privilege that is important to talk about, because I don't know what the path would have looked like if I didn't have that.
Right, right. I mean, it's like, it's the Maslow triangle, right? Like you need food and shelter before you can think about plot point two. You know what I mean? Like you have to have like,
100%.
Yeah.
And I like to pay it forward. I've always wanted to do a scholarship called A Room of Her Own, a reference to Virginia Woolf, that I don't want to see applications about your film necessarily. Like, I just want filmmakers to apply, and like, I would love to pay someone's rent. Like, I don't want to get into financing your film, but I know the value of space and to alleviate the stress of paying rent. Like, that changes people's lives.
That would be like the award before the like MacArthur Award, right? Like instead of $500,000, like this is what gets you to the place where you can actually plant the seeds and have the ability to explore a creative path. And then you make the project and then you get the MacArthur Award. But they always have to thank Molly because it all started there.
Right. Yeah, I'm just doing it so that they can thank me later. On the dedications.
I think that's a good idea though. That would be it's identifying a place in the journey that people probably overlook.
Oh, absolutely. And I feel like, there's part of me, I didn't talk about it for a while because I was like, oh, I don't know if I feel comfortable talking about financial support and all of that. But I think it's important because I think it's bullshit when people ask like, how do I get into the film industry? And, I just hate when people say like, oh, you just got to make a film or you just got to do that. It's like, you have no idea of what is going on in that person's life, who they're financially responsible to. Like, it's just so presumptuous to presume that someone can just make a film.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is impossible. And I know for myself, like I did almost 3 years of I had an open invitation to crash on a mattress at my sister's place in Santa Monica. And 50% of the year was here in LA, 50% was in New Jersey. And it was the ability to do that afforded me the opportunity to build the relationships that it would take 3 years to pay off, There's also this thing that I'm often referencing on the podcast, like you have mentors and you have cheerleaders. And it sounds like the Friends family was in the cheerleader category, but I know you worked as an assistant to Deepa and Mehta. Yeah. And was she more of a mentor for you? And can you talk about that relationship and journey?
Yeah, so Deepa is like one of Canada's most well-known directors. She's Indian Canadian. She was nominated for an Academy Award. She's just incredible. Like, she, as a woman and a woman of color, was doing the thing way before we were having these conversations. And that in and of itself is pretty remarkable. I was ready to get out of Canada and move to New York in one of the valleys. And then someone called and said, Deepa is looking for an assistant. And I, at that point was like, there's less than a handful of women writer-directors in Canada who can stand alone. It's like Sarah Polley or Deepa. So it's like, I need to see what this looks like, what this life looks like. So I was hired as her assistant, did that for about 2 years. And the ability to work that closely with a filmmaker, not only, I had access to her development, her editing suite, but sort of emotionally what it looks like to be a filmmaker. And it's no joke and it never ends. It goes on and on and on. And when I quit the job, I was so nervous to tell her because I was just so loyal and indebted to her. But I said, I was in tears and I said, I have to quit. And I was like, I think I need to start making films. And she sort of said a version of, well, what the hell are you doing sitting here then? She said, you better get up and start making films. And since then, she's been so supportive. She's someone who, you know, a couple months ago, I gave her a draft of a new feature I'll be shooting next year that I thought was much better than the first. And she was just sort of like, no. So that is invaluable. Someone who tells you that your draft has taken a step back from the first, like that is the type of person you want to send your script to.
This is forgive me if I don't phrase this question, but as you mentioned, like she pushed you, right, to kind of go toward making these films, and your friend before kind of pushed you into the web series. Do you find that you have an ability to see in other creatives that they need that same push? Like, can you see it, like, and totally identify?
Yeah, like even a few weeks ago, I posted on Instagram, like, because I'm in this Canadian quarantine where I can't leave the house for 2 weeks. So I posted on Instagram, like, hey, if there's, you know, people who want to ask me questions, I have time, so I can Zoom. And I've been Zooming with a couple of new emerging filmmakers every night. And this is weird to say. I can tell within 5 minutes, like just, and I'm sure you know, it's like not talking a single thing about film. It's how someone talks. It's their ability to tell a story, how they speak about themselves, how they speak about the world. Like you just know if someone is a filmmaker. And there was 1 or 2 people who just chatting with them, they haven't even, I'm not even sure if they've made a film, but now I'm invested in that person. And I'm like, please reach out to me. How can I help you? If I believe in you or I see something in you, I will do anything to help you. I'm a generous person. That being said, I don't DM me and say, can you read my script? Like that's not the way to get support. But if you do it sort of in the right way, and I believe in you, I really will do anything.
Right. This is almost worth like a commercial break, because that shit, it happens so often. Like I get so many DMs like, you know, oh, I want to like do this, or, you know, let me shadow you. It's like, like there's first, like if at least write Pete, comma.
Yeah.
And then,
yeah.
Like, and then start, right? Like at least do that. Like don't, it shows like you haven't taken the time to research, like, well, what is the process here? You know, I feel like you could, and this is part of why I want to do the podcast. Like you could listen to probably a podcast episode and get your question answered. That's hopefully the goal, you know, but like, you're not going to create a mentor in like a test tube. You know what I mean? It's going to happen from a natural progression of events where people can see that you're genuinely committed and passionate. Because, you know, another thing that would happen is like, you know, folks say, oh, let's work on this idea, or this would be great. I'd be like, yeah, well, why don't you draft that up? And then crickets, right?
Nothing.
Like nothing. And not that it's
they're like, hey, Pete, I'm just here to ride your coattails in case it isn't clear.
Yeah, and it's like just, but what's interesting is that I feel like I am now at 43 seeing what people must have seen in me, right? Like the people who like wrote $10,000 checks for my feature. I'm like, oh, you probably saw what I'm seeing in this person at 19. Like just like they believe in it, they've got a sense of understanding the world, and they need a shot more than anything.
Absolutely. I mean, I chatted with one filmmaker who spoke about intergenerational trauma. He was just telling me about his family, and I won't disclose who it is, but he just said, pain is an orbit that's followed my family, and sometimes it's in front of us, and sometimes it's behind us, and sometimes it walks alongside me. I've been thinking about that for days. I was talking to my therapist about it yesterday. Like, that visual description of how pain follows families, I was like, what? This person has to write the script, you know? And I was like,
right.
This is someone who I'm interested in. The other thing to sort of jump on what you were saying, in terms of when people are asking for help, like if someone has a specific ask, it's so much easier to help you. Like my first feature just played at this festival. I noticed you're repped by so-and-so. Like, what's your experience with them? Like, I don't know, just some pointed question, just like I want to talk about filmmaking or how to get into it. To your point, it's like, listen to podcasts or read books or.
Right. Yes. I might do an episode on that. My parting statement on it would be, though, my last assistant had sent me a DM. And it was this Eve Benesh, and it was written the right way, and I was like, oh, okay. I didn't delete it, and maybe 8 months later, a former NYU student of mine was like, oh, my buddy, that I know from Long Island had reached out to you, blah blah blah, and I was like, oh shit, that was dude, and then I went back to that DM. I was like, yo, let's meet. And then for about 6 months, he was my director's assistant. And now he's in writer's rooms and just got management but I knew from that, there was something about it that made me say, I'm not going to just delete this one. And I think that people could go a long way in studying how relationships are nurtured.
Yes.
This is Seath Man. You're listening to Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon.
How to Succeed as a Creative Professional is Pete Chatmon's upcoming book about his journey as a director. What started in 1993 has been a marathon full of persistence and creative pivots, transitioning from indie filmmaker to teaching at NYU's acclaimed film school, to running a production company, to directing television and commercials, and ultimately eyeing a return to the feature films that gave him his start. A mixture of how-to, self-help, and inspiration, this book will be for any person eyeing a successful career in a creative art. How to Succeed as a Creative Professional is coming soon.
Let's talk about Merry Goes Round, if you're not tired of talking about it after maybe 20, 30 festivals.
Yeah, no, I'd love to talk about it.
So I like to ask the synopsis from the writer director, because it's often not what you read. How would you describe the film?
Merry Goes Round is about a closeted, high-functioning alcoholic who is forced to take care of her estranged father and learns she has a half-sister that she doesn't know, and becomes forced into a pseudo-parent when she can't parent herself. But it's a dark comedy. It's not, it's not like August Osage County dark, but it's a tiny micro-budget feature, shot it in Canada. It was financed through Telefilm, which is our funding body. And luckily we got Aya Cash to star in it. And that was the turning point for my career, for sure.
Did you debate what tone you would tackle the subject matter with, or did you know, from the earliest seeds of the idea that it would be a dark comedy? Did you discover that, or did you step into it here's how I'm framing this story?
The sort of tightrope of drama and comedy is my natural habitat. It's my intuitive tone, mostly because I fall back on comedy when I am too uncomfortable with the truths I'm trying to actually say. So it's a protection mechanism for me a lot of the time, because a lot of my work is based in emotional experiences I've had. But with the script, financiers were sort of your trouble is going to be the tone. And people knew that on the page, because it's people are dying, but then someone has a joke, and it's a bit of a tonal roller coaster. But right. I just trusted myself to know it. And a large part of that was casting an actor who sort of embodies that darkness and that sense of comedy, which was Aya. And in the edit and musical choices. And I just trusted myself. I didn't really have a concern with people's reservation about the tone.
Right. That is one of my wishes for the larger industry, which is to put a little bit more faith in the audience, and to, you can't, there are certain things for which, if you're a fast food restaurant, you probably let the consumer dictate your menu to a degree, right? But like in a world where people are watching things on YouTube, they're watching things on premium cable, they're watching things that are genre hybrids, I really hope that we get to a point where the dramedy emerges as less of a like so-called risky approach to a story and just like a way of looking at it, because everybody lives their life as a dramedy. Yet when we, you know what I mean? Like,
that's a great point, because it's all tragic and also hilarious.
exactly. Like, you know, and yet though it's been decided that when folks get content, they are only going to want something that's so clear in one direction and at the omission of nuance often. That's my soapbox. And that
a good soapbox.
It's my complaint too, because I write dramedy and I find like it's harder to pitch. And even with, you know, there are some things I've been working on and I was like, well, let me go, like you go and you look at some other things that have been successful. Like I read the pilot for a show that's a dramedy. And I'm like, what becomes clear is you need that success in like the traditional classical storytelling arc to then say, I've shown you I can do it over here. And then now I'm going to do something that's different. Which is why I love what you did with the film, because you're coming out of the gate with, no, here's how we're going to do it over here.
Yeah.
And so from there, let's live there for a second. What did you learn on the feature that was like perhaps much different from having done the shorts?
A couple big takeaways from the feature. Number one, I would say just because you wrote something doesn't mean you can't do the directing prep. It doesn't mean that you intuitively know how to direct a scene. Like you still have to craft each scene as if it were given to you like someone else wrote it. So I think that was a big takeaway. I think the trust in when to pivot when things on the page don't work. I was so lucky to work with Aya, who is an amazing actor who is super respectful and, you know, knows how much work goes into the material, but would, you know, suggest things. And you have to work with actors, if you're lucky, that want to make your work better as well. And like for a character film like Mary Goes Round, Aya is the whole thing. So if something doesn't feel right to her on the page, trust your actor to know that. Like on day 16, they get the vibe. If they wouldn't say this line, they're not going to say this line.
Right.
And the other thing is just the longevity. Like it's just relentless. I don't think I had any clue how taxing it would be, both physically, emotionally, mentally, financially, just every fiber in your body is devoted to this. And, you know, it doesn't end when you wrap. Like the editing process is, as you know, it's both heartbreaking and exhilarating. It's a wild ride. And then you picture wrap it. And for me, interestingly, a film becomes a film in the sound mix. Like when you're hearing it in a proper theater, there's this like dimensionality to it where it's like, oh, it's a film, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great point, because also like at that moment when that's like it's like your final like line of defense for your original thesis, right? And if you're able to like lay in a sound bed that really elevates it to how you originally envisioned the scene, then you're like, oh, I really made this work. Or sometimes like it didn't work and you're like, maybe we should do something technically different here, really like off the beaten path to get it back to what we couldn't achieve in production for whatever reason.
Yeah. And it's just amazing, like just like a great sound designer, like the ideas they have, what they can bring, like I live for that shit.
Yeah, it's the best. Our first class in NYU Film School was called Sound Image, And I hated that shit because I was like, look, I'm ready. I came out of high school with my Super 8 camera. Like, I'm like, let's go.
Ready to
And
shoot.
let's shoot. And we didn't shoot for a year.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man. And now like you, I love the sound process. What's the difference in note giving to an actor on something you've written versus something where you've been invited to direct, like a television show?
Oh God, I think there is more. I think when you've written the material, you are the author. You came with the intent, you know the intent. So when you give a note, you are the author. That's not to say that your note is the right note, but there is just some trust that that you understand the material. When you're asked to guest direct and it's someone else's script, I mean, TV scripts, as you know, like drafts come out, pages come out all the time. Sometimes things can get sort of muddy during the production week, and then there's something that doesn't make sense from earlier. It's tough. I think the only way to give a good note to an actor when it's not your own material is to fucking know that script. Like, read it as much as you can, be as familiar as you can. That being said, like, ask the writer if something's not clear or you don't understand. Like, they're there to help you. They also want a good episode. And it's like, you guys have to be united front, especially if you have as you said, challenging actor. Who, on not great days, it's like, what is this? It doesn't make sense. I would do this. That's tough when you're giving a note and someone's like, this makes no sense, right? Because you're like, part of you might be like, I agree, but it's not for you to say that. Like, in an ideal scenario, every scene is great. Every episode is great. Sometimes it's not. Right.
Do you have any techniques that you found for when it's like, okay, I actually don't agree with this note, that you are insistent upon being transferred to the actor? Do you have any like secret tips on how you approach that?
Are you talking about, let's say, when a producer gives you a note on set that you emphatically disagree with?
Exactly. And they want that note, walked into said talent.
You have about 15 seconds, as you know, to walk from Video Village to that actor to think of a really clever justification. There's sort of a cleverness on your feet that hopefully is to your advantage. I would say, do not say so-and-so wants you to try this. Don't. It's like, no, you're the middleman. If you get shot, fine. But like, don't bring the producer down with you. Pose it as a question. I think the last 2 takes, you did this so well. This is out of left field. What about this? Because, unless they're sort of a huge dick, it's like, fine. And if not, they're going to be like, no, I disagree. And then maybe what I would do then is, if they don't want to do the note, I would try to have a conversation where you get a third take of something, so that when you go back to Village, the producer, there's some change. Because sometimes the note a producer's giving, they can't quite articulate it. But if you get some shift, it might have satisfied the note.
Right. It is we've said tightrope a lot in this conversation, but it
like
is
an episode of Man on a Wire, that guy the Twin Towers.
Exactly. No, I asked that because like I have my own ways. There are some times where it's like, all right, well, because every show is so different and comedies are so different.
What do you do?
So, okay. Are you a producing director on Bless This Mess?
Yeah.
Okay, so don't judge me.
I won't. I'm the person, let's say I'm like, hey, Pete, and I'm giving you a really shitty note. What's your move?
That might be one of the few times where I'd be like, do you want to walk in with me and maybe help relay this? Because sometimes you might find that There's a lot of temperature checking that's happening. And I've been on some shows where I'm like, wow, there's a point of contention between this talent and this EP or this, and it could be a writer EP. And I'm sensing that I'll never throw anyone under the bus, no, but I don't necessarily want to wear that note because I may lose some currency with this number one or number two on the call sheet if they believe that I think this is dope.
I know, you want to almost like wink, like.
Exactly. And so
yeah,
trying to find that. And then the flip of that is, and this is the emotional intelligence part of our jobs, right? I also think, well, there's a person who would say, if I did throw that person under the bus, that same actor could be like, oh, you're a bus thrower under her, so I can't fuck with you. And you're just like, oh, what is the way?
That's a great point. And like, you know, what I said earlier, like it depends on your relationship with the writer. Like sometimes if you're really have a great dynamic with the writers, like you guys, if you're at the mini monitors and if I'm not agreeing fully with the note, I'll, to your point, be like, let's go talk to them. Like at the same time, like you can back each other up and it can go the other way too. Like if you're trying to convey a note that the actor's refusing and the writer's like, yeah, we got to get this thing, they can also be with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you know what too? Like I found the more like collaborative I am from the beginning of prep, the more, I don't want to say leeway because leeway sounds like something's happening that shouldn't be happening, but the more leeway as we get into production. So it's like a lot of times I'll say, all right, so just how I love to work is the master. I'm more concerned about geography, less concerned about like really fine tuning the moments per se. So like if you see things that aren't happening, like let me know during the master, and then, you know, we'll tweak it as we go further. But on some scenes, it may not be about getting in there and turning a knob on the master. Mm-hmm. Because I know that the actor is going to start being like, it's the master. And also I know like we can keep the speed up. Mm-hmm. And then as we get into what really matters, start prodding it a little bit more.
That's a great tip because actors like to feel that you're keeping the set moving. And I think also experienced actors on series, like they just want to know that you're going to get them home, you know, do good work and move forward. So that's a great tip in terms of keeping the engine moving.
Right. So yeah, but it's, you know, who knows? It could totally not work as well. You're always trying to
for sure. I've had those. No, anything I say on a podcast as a tip one day or probably has backfired. But that's the beauty of it. It's a great experiment, you know, and that's why I love it. If you think you know something, oh, you don't because you haven't worked with that person.
Right. So how did you transition from episodic director to being a producing director on Bless This Mess?
That's a very good question that I wish I knew the answer to. I got an episode of the first season of Bless This Mess. It was 6 episodes. I basically, that was sort of a fluke because I had been asked back on a show that had sort of double booked me. They had promised a writer an episode. So then they were like, oh crap. So one of the EPs was also affiliated with Bless This Mess and got me an interview there. And my managers were like, it's first series, 6 episodes. It's going to be really hard to get this job. But I was like, all right. I met with Lake Bell and Liz Merriweather, and it's like a 10-minute interview. It went really well. And Liz walked in and was sort of like, hey, I'm Liz. And, you know, she's just like this prolific showrunner. And I was like, hey. And she was like, you seem cool. Are you going to direct this show? And I was like, I hope so. So I did 1 episode. I think it went well. I think I got along with the cast well, which in turn, I think when they were thinking about season 2, they were like, we'll have more episodes. We need someone around. So I got a call asking if I wanted to do that. I think my sense was that Fox was probably like, who is this person? Like even when I started my first week, I didn't really know what the job was entirely. Like I was like, when you Google producing director, there's not like a manual there. The DGA called, sorry, DGA people, if you listen, but they were like, hey, like we saw you got this job. That's great. I'm like, thanks. And they're like, all right, well, like no offense basically, but you don't have a lot of credits in the US, and like it takes people a lot of years to get this job you have. So it may be challenging. So I was like, sorry, was that the point of this call?
Thanks for the vote of confidence, right?
Yeah, it's, they have been great. And they were like, please, call us if we can support you in any way. So it was a lovely call, but it was sort of funny that even they were like, oh, this is interesting. And I think, in hindsight, referring to, I'm someone who I think had done 6 or 7 credits in Canada, came to the US, did 4 episodes of TV, and then got a producing directing job. There's guest directors coming in whose IMDb credits are like, blow mine out of the water. So how do you handle that? And I'm not there to be an enforcer. Like I really, as a director, like I'm on your side. If there's any sort of friction, like I'm here to help smooth it over. I'm going to give you sort of the lay of the land in terms of what we do in our show. We want your ideas, but like run something by me if you think it's, if it's outside of our show, and I'll run that by, Liz and Lake or whoever. Lake Bell is a filmmaker. She was a co-creator in the show. She starred in it. So I feel like I was sort of her right-hand person on set, because she's very particular about how things look. And she knew I was an independent filmmaker as well. So I think she had some trust in me. But no, I just like, we all know when it's like on set, like it's hard, too many opinions. A good producing director should be there to help you. They shouldn't be directing it for you. It's like, if you feel like running things by me, go for it. Like you don't have to show me your shot list. If you want feedback, I'm here.
We had Michael Spiller on, who was a producing director on the Mindy Project. And one thing he mentioned also that I thought was a really valuable part of the job or protection, bit of insurance. He was like, sometimes you'll be weeks later and they might be throwing a director under the bus. And he would be like, wait, remember we talked about that scene and no one wanted to shorten it? Or remember there was a kid and a dog and how crazy it was that day, which is something you might not think about, but there's so many, I know people who have been, put on the I don't know if it's called the blacklist, but like at certain studios where they're like, oh, one thing happens and it gets skewed a particular way. And then they're like, we're not hiring that person at this studio.
Yeah.
So
it's so hard. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It's a hard position because you're ultimately working for the showrunner, the EPs, the studio, like you're, sort of this, it's middle management. I feel like I'm the Michael Scott of the set. Like, I've only done it once. It's very hard. The best thing is that it's so rare you can see other directors work. And I'm like, I love this. Like Ken Whittingham comes in and directs a bunch. I'm like, first of all, can you adopt me? I love him. But I mean, he's a pro. So I'm the one asking him all this stuff in between takes. But the thing about him that I was like, God bless this man. He, despite having a bajillion other credits than me, I'm like new in town. He does a scene, turns around and is like, are you cool with that? Do we get everything? He's so respectful because, it's just some people, it's like, oh, you're younger, or you're this or you're that. People just don't have respect for you. And I so appreciated that about Ken.
Ken is the man. He was my assigned, and again, it kind of goes back to you have to grow a mentor naturally, but in the Disney ABC program, they assigned us a mentor, a DGA mentor, and he was mine. And I mean, such a wealth of information. And it was really cool because when there's that thing we do where it's like you get a job and you see who you can call, like to give you some intel. And in on Atypical season 2, I had done an episode. I did the 8th episode and he did the finale. And I was like, this is so cool looping back, because he called me up like, Pete, you know, what's the deal?
That's awesome.
And he's actually, what I'm working on myself is like, as a kind of tribute to watching him work, is the kind of theater of the job, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Right? Like there's like, it's cool if you make the days and have the shots and all that, but then there's like a presence and a theater to the act of the job that elevates you, which is why you've mentioned him, right?
He is so relaxed, and it's like there is a palpable difference in the crew, in the cast. The cast had a great time this week. I can sometimes, I'm a little high energy. I'm like, I can have some anxiety. I have to force myself, to your point of like the theater of the performance. It's like, I'm cool, I'm chill, I've got this. You know, it's like, I have to put myself, it's a performance. I'm not who I am in my personal life when I'm directing. Like, even though you're at Video Village, like you are on a stage, people are watching you. You just haven't gone through hair and makeup, unfortunately.
But they are watching.
Yes.
So this is kind of going back to your earlier question, although it's not quite earlier statement, but it's not totally. So I don't know why I'm saying this, but not in the sense of like as a female director, so to speak, right? But like as a director who's a woman, how has the industry changed? So less about the actual episode or work. How's the industry changed, and what do you think still needs to be addressed for women in the direct chair?
I think for a while there was like sort of this predatory thing of like, we need women directors now. And I can see it happening with, we need BIPOC directors, which is great. People want to change numbers, but it's like, how are we actually supporting those people in this environment? How are we absorbing failure? What happens if I make my second feature sucks? Like, do I have a third, you know? Because I often feel like a lot of white men can make a dud of a film and they continue to direct, or they do a crappy episode and they keep going. So I'm interested in talking about longevity for careers when everyone's really excited to make changes and make these quotas.
Right.
What I will say, this is a gross generalization, but women directors, I find, come super prepared, like binders, clipboards, whatever, their PDFs, because it's almost like they are walking in expecting to be challenged on some of the decisions they've made. And I'm not saying men don't prep, that is not the case. But I presume also people of color on set feel the same way. Like you're walking in where you're like, I'm gonna prove that I know what I'm doing, because it's just it's predominantly a white male space. Right. And that's just, it is what it is. So I can't speak to the BIPOC experience, but as a white woman, I've been offered enormous privileges and opportunities that I'm grateful for. It's not enough just to hire white women. The thing about hiring people who aren't just white men is there's differing ways of communicating and storytelling. Like, directing doesn't need to be pointing or like speaking really loudly, or, you know, there's other ways of communicating. You don't have to speak in certain words or volume.
That's a unique television challenge though, right? Versus, because like when you're doing, you know, Mary Goes Round, people are like, okay, here's our creative compass, the holder of the creative compass, the arbiter of taste for this project. And we are here with her to achieve the goal of telling this story collaboratively. But then there's like a kind of heightened militarization to the process of making TV, because it's like switching 4-star general week after week. And many of the things that we're talking about become, I mean, look, I say all the time, like when I do my like location scouts and my tech scouts, like I kind of go up a little bit, and in terms of like authority, like presentational authority, because I know that there are 30 people wondering, like, I'm going to listen to this fucking guy, and it's just a thing that is like insurance that hopefully doesn't have to continue to be a thing that you do. Because there are very capable directors that I shadowed, that I saw kind of the crew doing non-supportive things be really as a result of temperament, and yeah, I'm kind of just rambling on here, but
No,
I've
done the same thing myself too. It's funny. I am nice. I'm somewhat bubbly. I'm outgoing, but pretty early on, I will also, similar to you, make it clear that I am this, but like, don't get it twisted.
Right.
Like I know what I'm talking about. And look, there is a precision that needs to happen in order to make a day. There's a lot of money at stake, and I understand the mechanisms of that. But in terms of set culture and what constitutes leadership or communication styles, we need to be more open-minded.
Right.
However, you have to be a leader, and leadership looks like many things.
Right.
If you're not, if you just need to, you have to have good communication skills. You need to be a leader, whatever that looks like to you.
Right. Yeah. And I think, if I could add a hope to your hopes and your analysis, it would be the folks at the top recognizing that you have to see how to pull the best out of the people you have. Because, in using a sports analogy, like you could watch, I don't really watch football anymore, but you could have a player who within one offense has a shitty year, and then they get traded to somewhere else. It's like, oh, we can exploit these talents that you have in this way. And then they're at the Super Bowl. And it didn't reveal itself. It was always there. It was just, you chose to have a one size fits all approach to the process.
And some shows, like I felt like, oh, these aren't my people, and that's okay. And I think that's going to happen because I don't know, like even when I got my first directing job in the US, I was scared shitless. And I was like, all I can do is be the director that I am and the person I know how to be. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Knocking on wood, up until this point, it's been working.
That's why it worked.
Yeah, maybe.
I have a firm belief that the moment you start like saying, look, this is how I do it. Obviously I don't know everything. I've got shit to learn, but like, yeah, this is me. I'm prepared. I'm smart. I want to do it, but I may not be the best. You may not love me, and that's fine. And that's cool too. I will wake up tomorrow, and go write another feature.
Yeah. I read somewhere that again, this could be incorrect, but I read something to the effect that the crew generally forms an opinion on the director within like the first 11 seconds, which I was like, that seems about right.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting also, like I've talked to some other women directors about like what they wear on set. And I'm just fascinated by how directors choose to visually present themselves. And I think, only speaking from my experience as a woman, highly aware of that.
Yeah.
It's just sort of interesting.
But isn't it crazy how aspects of the job have to go through a thought matrix, a decision matrix, and it's all kind of unique to who we are individually, but like I definitely lay out the clothes for the next morning differently when I do, Insecure versus like another show.
Oh wow, you're advanced. You're PhD level getting dressed.
It's all the first day of school every day on the set, but there's this like, do I like, some shows I feel like, I can wear a tracksuit. Others, let me wear the jeans and a button down shirt. And not a baseball cap, but like a Kango, and it's just the preservation of, I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking it, but I also think that maybe I'm not.
I don't think that's good. I mean, if you referenced it yourself, the theater of being a director, sometimes I'm like, well, also because it was hot as hell shooting in Santa Clarita in August, but I'm like, I'm going to wear a pink tank top, And it's just like that. I'm going to wear a pink tank top and fucking a bold lip today. Cause I just fucking feel like it to be like, yeah, I can, have like my Blundstones and an oversized tracksuit one day. And then I'm in a pink top and lipstick because I want people to see like the variation of what a director, in my case, who happens to be a woman, can look like. And they still do the same fucking job.
And you're giving a very valuable, almost education for all the women who will follow you.
Yeah.
Because they'll be like, well, that looked like Molly on Tuesday.
Yeah, totally.
Or whatever it might be. So turning the corner, how are you feeling about returning to work in a COVID-19 environment?
Well, I'm taking a moment. I'm in Canada right now to rewrite a feature that I'm hoping to shoot in Canada early next year. And then I'm pitching 2 shows as well. So taking some time for development, which I think is what a lot of people are doing right now. I really want to be ready to go when things get up and running. I've heard rumblings of stuff happening. A fair amount of stuff in Canada is shooting actually, because the COVID situation is much more controlled here. It's a weird feeling of like, wow, am I going to work this year? However, I have been lucky enough where I said no to a couple things because I'm choosing to invest in myself right now. I worry about small things such as what does it look like communicating with actors when your face is covered? All the nuance of communication and the humanity of what we're doing. I'm worried what's being lost.
Yeah. I found myself over emoting with my eyes now, because that's sometimes that's like the underlining of like, oh, there's a smile underneath the mask, it'll be interesting. I think I'm supposed to start a show in 2 episodes of a show in September.
Awesome.
So when this airs, what'd you say?
Are you allowed to say what you're doing?
I guess so. It's on Apple TV.
Nice.
Half-hour comedy. And then I got a 1-hour drama in October. So it seems like it's
busy.
It's going. I'm kind of we'll see. I've yet to have
I'm gonna be hitting you up
swab.
to ask how that experience was.
Yeah, I'll provide feedback. Maybe I'll do an episode on that too once I know what it looks like. Yeah. Well, is there anything about your journey you want to share, or your perspective, or your lessons that I haven't interrogated out of you?
No, I think the only thing I would share is that I am blown away how quickly things can change every couple of years. I am blown away by how much I both know and don't know. It's like, the journey never ends. I think as time goes on, you're catering less to what people want and you have to be doing what ultimately lets you sleep at night. Where's your integrity in this? For me, I love this so deeply, but my integrity is important. The types of stories I tell matter. And I think we have a responsibility to move the needle in some way in the work that we do. And that is both in the work that we choose to sign on to, but how we treat people, what's our relationship to our peers. So it's sort of twofold. And I think, the events of this past year have brought up a lot of conversations, and I think everybody's learning, myself included. It's been eye-opening, but ultimately I do feel really optimistic for where things are going and the types of people who are going to be working. Like, things are bleak right now, but let's see what kind of work we're looking at in 5 years. I think it's going to be really cool.
All right. Molly McGLYNN.
That was me.
What's up, people? This is Pete Chatmon. Follow me on Instagram and on Twitter via @PeteChatmon. Follow the pod on Facebook on our Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon official page, and hit up our mailbag with questions, suggestions, or hey, donations if you're feeling like it, via letsshootwithpetechapman@gmail.com. And just in case you need to know how to spell it, that's Pete with the last name Chatmon. All right, y'all, that's episode 15 of Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon. I want to invite you to go into the archive, into the catalog. If you haven't, check out all of the great content we've been bringing you so far. And I will tease you with our guest for next week. It seems like this is almost 3 back-to-back-to-back director-to-director conversations that started with Seeth Mann in episode 14, continued with Molly McGLYNN today in episode 15. And next week, we will have the formidable director, Millicent Shelton, and she will talk to us about her journey from law. I think she was in law school to music videos to, we met officially when I shadowed her on Ballers back in 2016, or that might have been 2017. And she's just killing the game, continues to work, developing new material, and she's been awarded and recognized across half hours and hour-long shows. So we get into a really good conversation I hope you'll enjoy. And if you have not registered to vote, go out there and get that, make that happen, because we got a lot at stake coming up on November the 3rd, 2020. My next intro and outro will be back at the Podcast Central in my office. Apologize for the handheld iPhone video here, but prepping 2 episodes got a little hectic, and my team reminded me that I had not sent them an intro and outro. So I want to give a shout out to my producer, Tristan Nash, my assistant producer, Jada George, our lovely announcer, Kelly McCreary. And in the meantime, everybody, stay out there making your projects, spread love, and that's what we're going to do. Later.